When Jimin walked onto the set of one of the most watched talk shows in America, the audience expected just another light-hearted celebrity interview. What they didn't know was that the host, Ethan Caldwell, had one goal: to corner, humiliate, and discredit his guest with a series of gotcha questions. But what Ethan didn't realize was that Jimin wasn't just another pop star. He was a force of nature. And what happened next didn't just leave the host speechless. It sent shock waves through the media. Because, in true Jimin fashion, he turned this interview into a masterclass on truth, confidence, and dismantling media bias. It was a studio buzzing with energy, the bright overhead lights bathing the stage in a golden glow as cameras panned over a restless crowd. Audience members leaned forward in their seats, some clutching their phones, already poised to record. They weren't just here for an interview, they were here for a showdown. At the center of it all sat Ethan Caldwell, the smooth-talking, self-assured liberal host known for his gotcha-style interviews and viral takedowns of public figures who didn't share his worldview. He sat with perfect posture, his designer suit crisp, a polished smirk fixed on his face. He thrived on these moments, the build-up before a guest walked into his carefully laid trap. Tonight's guest, JIMIN of BTS. The name alone carried global weight, evoking not only fame but also respect from millions. But unlike the polished, media-trained pop idol image most associated with K-pop stars, JIMIN was something else: thoughtful, grounded, and unapologetically honest. Ethan was eager to remind him of that. A stagehand whispered something into his earpiece. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, heads turned toward the entrance, and then he walked in. JIMIN entered with a quiet, unshakable confidence, no nervous glances, no rushed steps. He shook hands with the show's producer, nodded at a few audience members, then finally reached Ethan. Their handshake was firm, equal parts cordial and loaded. JIMIN took his seat with a slight smirk, crossing one leg over the other, exuding the calm of a man who already knew how this was going to go. Ethan leaned forward, smirk widening. His voice was warm, smooth, a mask of politeness just thin enough to see through. Not every day we have a K-pop star with, let's say, controversial opinions in this chair. A few chuckles from the audience, a few knowing nods. The trap had been set. JIMIN chuckled softly, shaking his head. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. Instead, he simply folded his hands in his lap, relaxed, waiting. "Well," he said, voice steady, ready for battle. "Let's see where this goes." Ethan, and just like that, the energy in the room shifted. The audience had come expecting a takedown. Instead, they were about to witness a masterclass in composure. Ethan wasted no time. "Let's start with the elephant in the room," he said, flashing his signature grin, the kind that screamed, "I've got you right where I want you." He leaned in, pen tapping lightly against the desk, voice casual but cutting. "You've been labeled a conspiracy theorist for speaking out against some global institutions and media practices. Do you really think your views have any credibility?" The audience laughed. A few members shook their heads as if JIMIN had already lost. JIMIN didn't blink. Instead, he exhaled slowly, leaned forward just slightly, and met Ethan's gaze head-on. "You mean the same media that twists stories for clicks, distorts narratives about people like me, and silences voices that challenge the mainstream?" The audience gasped. Ethan's smirk faltered, just a flicker, but it was there. The reaction wasn't what he had expected. JIMIN tilted his head slightly, letting the moment breathe. His voice remained calm, measured, like a teacher explaining something to a student who should already know better. "Tell me, Ethan, at what point does questioning the narrative become dangerous? When you ask once, twice? Or do we wait until years later when we realize what was labeled misinformation was actually the truth?" The audience murmured, shifting uncomfortably. Some whispered to their neighbors. Ethan cleared his throat, regaining his footing. "That's a clever way to dodge the question. But let's be real, you've questioned the media, the entertainment industry, even public health policies." "Public health experts?" JIMIN cut in smoothly, one eyebrow raised. "You mean the same ones who told people that attending events would be fine, then turned around and said it wasn't, depending on the day? The ones who silenced artists, but kept corporate interests going. A low ooh rippled through the crowd. Ethan's jaw clenched just slightly. JIMIN sat back, still relaxed. He wasn't arguing, he was dismantling. If questioning official narratives is dangerous, he continued, voice softer now, letting the words sink in, maybe the real problem isn't the questions, it's the answers. Dead silence. For the first time that night, Ethan didn't have a comeback ready to fire. Ethan blinked, shifting in his seat. The moment of silence hung thick between them. But Ethan was a pro, and pros don't let silence linger too long. He forced a chuckle, flipping through his cue cards, straightened his tie, and leaned forward. But respected media analysts disagree with you. A calculated move. The audience perked up. This was the classic appeal to authority, the moment where JIMIN was supposed to buckle, backpedal, or fumble. Instead, JIMIN grinned, not a nervous grin, not an unsure grin, a knowing one. The kind that said, "Oh, we're really doing this." "Which ones?" he asked, tilting his head. "The ones backed by entertainment conglomerates with stock in record labels and media networks." Boom! The audience murmured, a few people chuckled, others clapped, some even outright cheered. The energy in the room shifted again. Ethan's smirk twitched. He knew he had to keep control. "Come on," he said, forcing another chuckle. "Are you saying every expert who disagrees with you is compromised?" JIMIN leaned back, crossed his legs, and folded his hands in his lap. "Not every expert, Ethan," he said smoothly, "just the ones you put on television." Scattered applause. Ethan exhaled through his nose, gripping his pen a little tighter. JIMIN kept going, his voice calm but unmistakably sharp. "Here's the problem. The institutions that are supposed to hold the entertainment industry accountable, they're funded by the same people they're supposed to regulate. You think that's a conspiracy? No, that's public record. You can look it up." The audience wasn't laughing anymore, they were listening. When a media platform censors stories about labor exploitation in the music industry, or when labels silence artists for speaking out, are they protecting the audience or themselves? Ethan swallowed, his usual quickfire retorts failing him. The audience wasn't just reacting anymore, they were questioning. Ethan inhaled deeply, regaining some of his composure. "It sounds like you're playing the victim here," he said, his voice edged with sarcasm. "Are you suggesting the media is unfair to you?" JIMIN laughed, not bitterly, not nervously, but genuinely. He shook his head, glancing around the room as if Ethan had just told a joke. "You mean the same media that accused BTS of being manufactured without ever understanding our story?" The audience stirred, whispers spreading like wildfire. JIMIN continued, his voice growing steadier, sharper, cutting through the noise like a blade. "The same media that mocked us for breaking into the US charts, then scrambled to feature us when we topped Billboard. The same media that promoted Asian representation while dismissing us as a fad." Ethan tensed, his lips parted slightly as if to interrupt, but JIMIN wasn't done. "The same industry that preaches mental health advocacy, then pressures idols to work non-stop for profit." The audience erupted, laughter, applause, even a few people standing. Ethan shifted in his chair, his usual control was slipping away. "JIMIN," he started. JIMIN held up a hand, just slightly, not aggressive, just enough to cut through the noise. "Look, Ethan, the media isn't here to tell the truth. It's here to protect power. When it suits them, they pretend to be watchdogs, but when it threatens their narrative, they turn into lapdogs." Another eruption from the audience, louder this time. Ethan sat rigid, clearly trying to maintain his composure. But his audience, his own audience, wasn't with him anymore. And the worst part, JIMIN wasn't even trying to win. He was just telling the truth. Ethan adjusted his posture, rolling his shoulders back like a boxer shaking off a hit. He wasn't out yet. He still had cards to play. He glanced at his cue cards, then back at JIMIN, a new angle forming in his mind. Climate change. That was the one topic where he was sure he could paint his guest as outdated, anti-science, even reckless. He leaned in, flashing his signature smirk. You've questioned certain climate policies. Are you saying climate change isn't real? A layup. The audience perked up, some grinning, waiting for JIMIN to stumble into the trap. But he didn't. Instead, JIMIN cut in smoothly, voice calm, deliberate. Ethan, don't misrepresent me. Ethan's smile flickered. Of course the climate is changing, JIMIN continued, his tone steady, unwavering. The question is, do you actually care about solutions or just control? Boom! The audience erupted. Scattered claps turned into full-blown applause. Even some of Ethan's most loyal viewers nodded in approval. Ethan's smirk vanished. His jaw tightened. His grip on the cue cards visibly stiffened. This wasn't the answer he had prepped for. JIMIN leaned forward, his hands folded on the table, the picture of composure. See, this is the problem, he said. Real environmentalism is about cleaning up our water, our air, making sure our food isn't poisoned with chemicals. But the people in charge, they don't care about that. They care about power. The audience was hanging on every word. Tell me, Ethan, how come small farmers in Middle America are getting taxed into oblivion over carbon footprints, while the biggest polluters in the world, China, multinational corporations, the billionaire class, get sweetheart deals and loopholes? Silence. Why are everyday Americans being told to pay more for gas, for groceries, for energy, while politicians fly private jets to climate summits and pat themselves on the back? A low murmur swept through the room. This was hitting home. Ethan forced a chuckle, but it was tight, almost strained. He was losing control again. So what, you don't believe in reducing emissions? He pressed, trying to salvage the moment. JIMIN shook his head. I believe in real solutions, he said, not punishing working people while elites cash in. The audience roared. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. He had nothing. The trap had failed. And for the first time all night, he looked like he knew it. Ethan was struggling, and everyone could see it. His usual rhythm, the carefully rehearsed pivots, the well-timed interruptions, was completely off balance. But he wasn't about to fold. He took a slow breath, tapping his pen against the desk, searching for an opening. Then he found it. JIMIN, he said, his voice taking on a measured, almost concerned tone. Let's talk about something serious. You've been accused of spreading misinformation about mental health and industry practices. Aren't you putting lives at risk? The audience murmured in agreement. This was supposed to be a winning move. But JIMIN didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted his head, almost amused. Misinformation, he repeated, as if the word itself were a joke. Then he dropped the hammer. If it's misinformation, why did multiple labels quietly change their artist contracts last year after pressure from fans and human rights groups? Gasps. Ethan blinked. JIMIN pressed forward, unshaken. Why did entertainment agencies deny overworking idols, then admit months later that they had pushed people to collapse on stage? Why did streaming platforms downplay manipulation accusations, then change their algorithms without explanation? Silence. Ethan looked stunned, caught between responding and staying silent. The audience felt it, the shift in energy, the reality that JIMIN was in full control now. And then he delivered the knockout. I'm not against the industry, Ethan, he said. I'm against corruption. Ethan's face fell. But if calling out corruption is a problem, JIMIN added, his voice smooth, maybe that tells us everything we need to know. The crowd erupted. Some stood, others clapped, a few even whistled. Ethan, he just sat there, hands folded, staring at his guest. For the first time all night, he had nothing left to say. Ethan was losing control, and he knew it. The audience wasn't nodding along with him anymore. They weren't smirking at Jimin like they had at the start. They were listening, really listening. And that was a problem. He couldn't let this spiral any further. He needed to remind the audience that Jimin was just another celebrity with no real platform, a novelty act, not someone to be taken seriously. So he went for it. "You're popular, sure, but your views don't align with either political or industry leadership," Ethan said, his tone sharper now, almost accusatory. "Do you really think you stand a chance at influencing anything?" A smug attempt at dismissal. The audience murmured, waiting for Jimin to justify himself. But he didn't flinch. Instead, he smirked. "That's exactly why I have a chance, Ethan." The words hung in the air. And for a second, it was dead silent. Then the room exploded. Applause, cheers. Some even stood up, clapping, as if Jimin had just landed a knockout punch. Because in a way, he had. Ethan visibly tensed. But Jimin wasn't finished. "People are tired of being lied to by both sides," he continued, his voice calm but unshakably firm. "They're sick of corporations that pretend to care, of media that manipulates perception, of insiders who run the show like a private club." The crowd roared again. Ethan forced a chuckle, but his grip on the desk tightened. Jimin leaned in slightly, locking eyes with the host, his tone cutting but composed. "I'm not here to fit into your labels, Ethan. I'm here to tell the truth, and judging by this reaction." He gestured subtly toward the audience, still clapping, some even whistling. People are ready for that. Another wave of cheers. Ethan's face was stone cold. He knew it, the producers knew it, the audience knew it. He had completely lost control of his own show. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. This was supposed to be his moment, his viral takedown. Instead, Jimin was winning. He needed a reset, a lifeline, something, anything, to bring the narrative back in his favor. He went for one last, desperate swing. "If your views are so popular," Ethan said, leaning forward, his tone harder now, "why does the mainstream dismiss you?" A classic trap. Frame him as fringe, paint him as a conspiracy theorist without ever saying the words. The kind of question designed to force a defensive response. "Jimin." He didn't even blink. He leaned back, folding his arms slowly, like a man who knew exactly what was coming. Then, in the calmest, most matter-of-fact voice imaginable, he dropped the hammer. "You just answered your own question." The audience froze. Even Ethan looked confused for a half-second before Jimin continued. "The mainstream exists to protect the establishment, not the people." Boom! Silence. Then a tidal wave of applause. This time it wasn't just polite claps. It was a standing ovation. The audience had officially turned. Ethan sat there, frozen, gripping his pen like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. He had no comeback, no snarky pivot, no rehearsed counterattack. Because Jimin had just exposed the entire game. And the worst part, the people knew it. The second the show cut to commercial, the studio was still buzzing. Audience members murmured, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others hurriedly typing on their phones. Ethan sat stiffly in his chair, staring at the desk, his usual confidence completely drained. Backstage, the producers were scrambling. "We need to control the narrative now. Clip out some of his answers before we upload it to YouTube. Do we spin it or just hope people forget?" It didn't matter. They were already too late. Somewhere in the audience, a live streamer had captured everything. A perfect, uninterrupted angle of Jimin owning the moment, exposing the media, and turning the crowd against their own host. And within minutes, the internet was on fire. The clips spread like wildfire, from Twitter to YouTube, from Facebook to Instagram. Reaction videos flooded TikTok, Even conservative, independent, and neutral commentators were weighing in. This is what happens when you put a real voice in front of a scripted talking head. JIMIN just ended this man's credibility in real time. You can't fake authenticity, that's why this hit so hard. Ethan's own fanbase was split. Some loyalists tried to defend him, but they were outnumbered by people who saw through the act. Even mainstream pundits started damage control. CNN, JIMIN's rhetoric is concerning and oversimplified. MSNBC, this was a case of charisma overpowering nuance. Ethan Caldwell issued a statement on Twitter, "Healthy debate is important. I respect JIMIN's passion, even if I disagree with his views. Let's keep the conversation civil." It was weak. Forced. Too little, too late. Because no one was talking about Ethan anymore. They were talking about JIMIN. And nothing could stop it now. JIMIN didn't gloat. There were no victory laps, no smug tweets, no self-congratulatory press statements. He simply moved on. But the world hadn't. A week later, in a small, no-frills press conference, a reporter finally asked him, "JIMIN, did you expect your interview with Ethan Caldwell to go this viral?" JIMIN chuckled, shaking his head. "I just told the truth," he said simply. "It's amazing how rare that is these days." That one line, instantly viral again. Because by now, something bigger was happening. People who had never considered JIMIN as anything more than a performer were watching his speeches, reading his words, questioning everything. The comment sections on his videos were exploding. "I wasn't a fan before, but after that interview, I'm listening. I never realized how corrupt the media really was. He's actually making sense, that's what scares them." Across America, the awakening had begun. This wasn't just a viral moment anymore. This was a cultural shift. More people started rejecting scripted narratives, questioning talking points, seeking the truth for themselves. And JIMIN's influence, it skyrocketed. Ethan's reputation became a cautionary tale. And the media, they knew what had just happened. But there was nothing they could do to stop it. Because in a world full of scripted lies, the truth is the most powerful weapon of all. And JIMIN just proved it.